There is a prayer in the Bible that carries the weight of centuries, a prayer whispered in the wilderness, not from a palace or a prophet on a mountaintop, but from the heart of a man who had been broken, tested, and transformed in the depths of the desert. This is not just any psalm, it is the oldest psalm in the Bible, written not by David, but by Moses himself. Psalm 90. You weren't led here by accident. Something inside you, perhaps a heaviness, a silence, a longing, drew you here. And right now, as you press play on this moment, God is pressing pause on your confusion, because Psalm 90 is not merely a collection of ancient words. It is a map, a mirror, a message. It reveals how to pray when you're tired of pretending, how to speak when your words no longer make sense, and how to reconnect when your soul has wandered too far. This prayer doesn't beg for blessings. It doesn't pretend that life is easy. It speaks of time, of wrath, of frailty, of sin, and of the mercy that reaches into the dust of our failures. It is the sound of a man who saw nations rise and fall, yet still fell on his knees because he knew nothing lasts unless it begins and ends with God. Moses had spoken to God face to face. He had seen seas split and plagues fall. He had watched the mightiest kingdom tremble before a staff. And yet, when he prayed as a man who knew how short life is, who knew the ache of delay, the pain of rebellion, and the loneliness of leadership. His prayer was not majestic. It was mortal. It was human. It was real. This is not just a video. It's a moment for you to ask, am I living with eternity in mind, or just surviving each day? Have I forgotten how to number my days? Do I still believe God can satisfy me with His mercy in the morning? If you've been running, wandering, or feeling like your life has no anchor, Psalm 90 is God's call back to clarity. And as we explore each line, you won't just hear Moses' voice. You will hear mine, says the Lord, speaking to the wilderness inside you. Let's walk into this sacred prayer together. Let's begin where Moses began. In the silence before the storm, in the cry before the promise, in the dust before the glory, when God breaks you to rebuild your identity. Before Moses ever faced Pharaoh, before he ever split the sea, he faced something far more terrifying, his own reflection. After fleeing Egypt in fear and shame, Moses was no longer the prince he once was. The wilderness stripped him of everything: power, pride, prestige. But that's exactly where God began His greatest work. Because before God uses you publicly, He breaks you privately. In Exodus 3, Moses sees a bush on fire but not consumed, and God speaks through the flames. But don't miss this: the fire wasn't around Moses, it was within him. He wasn't just looking at a burning bush. He was looking at a mirror of his own soul, full of questions, guilt, regret, but still burning with a calling he couldn't escape. And God said, "Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground." Imagine that. After all your mistakes, after being rejected, after losing everything, God still calls that ground holy. Not because of where Moses was standing, but because of who was standing with him. Maybe you've disqualified yourself because of your past. Maybe you've believed the lie that God can't use someone like you. But hear this today: God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Just like He did with Moses, He's breaking false identities off of you, titles that Egypt gave you, traumas you've carried, and lies you believed. Why? Because He's about to rebuild you with purpose. You are not who the world says you are. You are who God says you are. And He speaks in the fire, not just the peace. Declare in the comments, "I am being rebuilt by the voice of God." Like this video and subscribe to the channel so that more broken people can find the hope and truth you've just heard. This is only the beginning. The wilderness didn't end Moses. It revealed him. Stay with me and we'll keep uncovering what Psalm 90 really means when you've been broken, burned, and called. The prayer of a wounded leader. Psalm 90 begins now. Imagine this. You're standing in silence, in a vast and lonely wilderness. You look up and you speak, but this time you're not commanding plagues or parting waters. You're whispering a prayer, a cry from the deepest part of your soul. That's where Psalm 90 begins. It is the only psalm written by Moses, and it's not a song of victory. It's a desperate plea, a confession, a broken leader talking to a holy God. Lord, you have been our dwelling place through all generations. Psalm 91, notice this. Moses doesn't begin by talking about the promised land. He doesn't begin with power or miracles. He begins with presence, because after all he's seen, plagues, deliverance, rebellion, judgment, Moses has learned one thing. Without God, every place is a desert. You can be surrounded by people and still feel lost. You can be leading a crowd and still feel alone. You can be out of Egypt and still have Egypt inside you. So Moses goes deeper. He says, before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. V2. This isn't just poetry. It's a reckoning. Moses is not speaking as a prince or a prophet. He's speaking as a man who has buried a generation in the sand. He's seen death. He's felt disappointment. He's tasted the bitterness of leading a people who never entered the promise. And yet, he still calls God his dwelling place. Can you say the same? When the prayers go unanswered, when the desert doesn't end, when you feel like you've failed, can you still call God your home? That's the question Moses answers, not with theology, but with tears. He doesn't run from the pain, he pours it into prayer. Write in the comments, even in the wilderness, God is my dwelling place. Subscribe now and like this video to help this prayer reach others who are still wondering. Because someone out there needs to know they're not forgotten. Stay with me. The next verses of Psalm 90 reveal something even more shocking. Why God sometimes lets time break us before he restores us. Time, dust, and the silent voice of God. Let's go deeper. After declaring God as his eternal refuge, Moses says something that might shake you. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. Psalm 93. Wait, what? Isn't Moses the same man who saw the Red Sea open? The same man who called water from a rock? Now he's talking about dust. Yes, because Moses has lived long enough to realize this. Time is a desert, and without God, we all return to dust. Every dream, every title, every crown eventually falls to the ground if it's not rooted in eternity. How many of us are chasing things that won't last? Moses saw it all. Wealth in Egypt, fame in the palace, power in miracles. And yet he writes this, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by. Psalm 94. He's not being poetic, he's being prophetic. Moses is telling you, you're running out of time. That's not fear, that's truth. God is not measuring your life by how much you have, but by how much you trust. And here's the twist. Sometimes God brings you into the desert not to punish you, but to strip away the illusions, to reveal what truly matters. He lets you feel the weight of time so you'll fall into the eternity of his presence. You sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. Psalm 95. Moses is not being morbid. He's being real. Because nothing wakes a sleeping soul like the awareness that life is short. But God is eternal. Urgency is rising now. You've been waiting for things to change, but God has been waiting for you to return. Return from the idols. Return from the distractions. Return from the version of yourself that is exhausted and hollow. Come back to the secret place. Come back before the dust settles. He's about to ask God something you may have been too afraid to ask. The wilderness is not a trap. It's a divine strategy. What if I told you that the wilderness you're walking through right now isn't your downfall, but your launch pad? That the place you call barren, where nothing seems to grow, nothing seems to move, is actually the very ground where God is building the unshakable version of you. This is the deception most fall into. They believe the desert is a trap, a punishment, or even a curse. But the truth, shocking and sacred, is this: the wilderness is a divine strategy, and no one models this better than Moses. Before he led a nation, he was led into isolation. Before he held the tablets of God's law, he held nothing but a shepherd's staff. Before he parted the Red Sea, he wandered through dry land. This was not coincidence, it was design. God doesn't trust untested strength, and he doesn't release unprepared leaders. The wilderness is his training ground. Maybe you feel forgotten, invisible, like life has passed you by. But here's what Moses teaches us. Just because people don't see you doesn't mean God has stopped watching. In fact, it's often when no one else is looking that God is doing his greatest work. Why? Because he's stripping you of every identity that was built on applause, approval, and performance. And he's building in you a new foundation, one that can carry destiny without collapsing under pressure. The wilderness is the place where your ear becomes tuned to God's whisper, where your heart becomes soft to his correction, and your will is molded to obey without understanding. That's not weakness. That's power under control. That's the kind of vessel God can use. Don't run from the wilderness. Don't curse it, embrace it. Because if you allow it, the very ground you're despising today will become the sacred place where your calling is born. The wilderness isn't a delay. It's preparation dressed in disguise, the burning bush, when God speaks through fire. Have you ever been in a moment so intense, so confusing, so overwhelming, that it felt like your life was on fire? Not the kind of fire that warms or comforts, but the kind that consumes. Moses was, and it was there in the fire that God chose to speak. Moses wasn't looking for a divine encounter. He wasn't fasting or praying on a mountaintop. He was doing something ordinary, tending sheep. But suddenly, everything changed. A bush caught fire, not because of the heat, not because of a lightning strike. It burned, yet wasn't consumed. It burned, yet didn't die, just like you. That's when God called him by name. Moses, Moses. And Moses replied, "Here I am." Notice something powerful. God didn't speak until Moses turned aside to look. The miracle had already started. The fire was already there. But the encounter only began when Moses decided to turn his attention to it. Could it be that God is already speaking in the middle of your crisis, but you haven't turned aside to see it? Could it be that what you think is destroying you is actually the voice of the Lord calling you closer? God didn't shout from heaven. He didn't send an angel to shake the earth. He used a bush set on fire. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't clean, but it was holy. "Take off your sandals," God said, "for the place where you're standing is holy ground." And Moses, the fugitive turned shepherd, took off his shoes, not just because God told him to, but because he realized, this fire isn't here to kill me, it's here to call me. Maybe your burning bush isn't literal. Maybe it's a heartbreak, a betrayal, a sudden loss, a sickness, or a door that slammed shut when you needed it open. But what if the fire you're walking through is sacred? What if it's not there to destroy you, but to awaken you? The next time you feel the heat, don't run. Turn aside. Look closer. God still speaks from fire. The shadow of God in the wilderness, when you feel forgotten. The wilderness is not just a place. It's a feeling. It's the moment when your prayers seem unanswered, when doors remain closed, and silence becomes your only companion. Moses knew that feeling. After his encounter with the burning bush, he returned to Egypt, full of divine purpose. But what followed wasn't immediate victory. It was rejection, delay, and more waiting. The wilderness wasn't over. It had only shifted. God had promised deliverance, but Pharaoh's heart grew harder. The people's suffering increased, and Moses began to wonder, did I hear God wrong? Did I fail? Did God change his mind? But the truth is, the wilderness isn't proof of God's absence. It's often the evidence of his preparation. When Moses led Israel out of Egypt, they didn't walk straight into the promised land. They walked into the desert for 40 years. Why? Because the people were free, but their mindset wasn't. Their bodies had left Egypt, but their hearts were still enslaved. Maybe that's you. You've left behind what hurt you. You've walked away from what enslaved you. But you find yourself in a dry, lifeless season, wondering if God has abandoned you. Let me tell you, He hasn't. He's closer in the wilderness than you realize. Scripture says God led Israel by a cloud during the day and by fire at night. Not ahead of them, not behind them, but above them. A constant shadow, a hovering light, a reminder, even here I am with you. You might not feel the presence of God in the way you expect, but that doesn't mean He's gone. Sometimes His voice isn't thunder. It's the shadow that keeps you cool in the heat of your trial. It's the fire that warms you when the cold of doubt creeps in. Don't mistake silence for absence. In the wilderness, God teaches you to see differently, to listen differently, to trust beyond what's visible. Maybe the desert you're in is not a detour. Maybe it's the path. And the shadow that follows you, it's not just your own, it's the covering of the Almighty. When the sand hides the promise, lessons buried in the wilderness. There's something powerful about the silence of sand. It doesn't shout like thunder or crash like waves. It simply exists, quiet, unshaped, seemingly lifeless. And yet, beneath its surface, stories are buried, bones of battles long fought, footsteps of pilgrims and prophets. In the wilderness of your life, it may feel like nothing is happening, but don't be deceived. The silence of the sand is where some of God's greatest work takes place. Moses walked on sand every single day for decades. After fleeing Egypt, he didn't find comfort or certainty. He found wilderness, but it was there, walking on that endless terrain, that Moses learned to listen, not to the wind, not to the ground, but to the still, quiet stirring of the Spirit. The most profound revelations are not always wrapped in noise. Sometimes they're buried deep in the ordinary days, the painful delays, the repetition, the confusion. God isn't always loud, but He is always present. It was in that wilderness, surrounded by nothing but sand, that Moses encountered the burning bush, a flame that did not consume, a voice that spoke destiny. The very ground he had cursed as barren became holy the moment God stepped into it. So here's the lesson. The desert you hate might be the holy ground God is preparing. The same wilderness where Moses thought he was forgotten became the launching pad for divine legacy. What if the delay in your life isn't punishment? What if it's permission to slow down, to dig deeper, to hear God whisper something too sacred to be shouted? In Psalm 90, attributed to Moses, we read, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." That is not the cry of a man in luxury. It's the cry of a man who has wandered, waited, watched others fall, and still clung to hope. Don't rush out of the desert too soon, because beneath its silence, there is wisdom. There are promises. There are foundations being laid that no storm will be able to shake. And when the time is right, the sand will part, and you'll walk into the fulfillment of everything God whispered to you when no one else was watching. The timeless cry, "Return, O Lord," and the heart of Moses. There are cries that echo through generations, not because of their volume, but because of their depth. And among all the prayers and psalms ever written, there is one cry that feels ancient, yet achingly modern. It's found in Psalm 90:13, where Moses pleads, "Return, O Lord, how long?" Pause here for a moment. This is Moses, not a weak man, not a man unfamiliar with miracles, not someone without spiritual authority. This is the leader who saw the Red Sea split, who heard God's voice thundering from Mount Sinai, and yet this is also the man who knows what it is to wait, to ache, to wonder if God is still near. Return, O Lord. Isn't that the secret prayer of countless souls today? When life strips you of clarity, when the silence of heaven becomes louder than the noise of earth, when promises seem postponed and your strength runs dry, there in the quiet of your soul, that same ancient cry rises, "God, where are you?" But Moses doesn't stop at the question. He continues in Psalm 90:14, "Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days." This is not the cry of despair, it is the cry of deep hope. Moses knows what we forget. The desert doesn't last forever. The silence is not the end. Even if it takes a generation, even if it costs everything, God returns. His love satisfies. And when it does, the soul finds its joy, not in the resolution of every problem, but in the restoration of divine presence. That's what this psalm teaches us. It's not a song of victory. It's a cry from the middle of the storm. It's raw, real, reverent. And that's exactly why it connects so deeply, because some of us aren't waiting for a miracle. We're just waiting for God to make himself known again. So if your heart has whispered, "How long, Lord?" You're not faithless, you're faithful. And your wilderness journey has been walked before, by prophets, by poets, by Moses himself. You are not alone. God hears. And when he returns with mercy, it won't just be a visitation. It will be a transformation. The hidden prophecy in Moses' prayer, a glimpse into eternity. As we reach the closing verses of Psalm 90, something profound happens, something many overlook. This ancient prayer, written by Moses in a moment of vulnerability and divine longing, suddenly shifts. It moves from lament to prophecy, from exhaustion to expectation. "Let your work be shown to your servants, and your glorious power to their children." Psalm 90:16. This is not merely a poetic request, it's a prophetic declaration. Moses, standing in the vastness of the desert, is not just praying for himself. He's looking forward. He's speaking into the lives of those who will come after him, into your life, into mine. He knew his journey would not end in the promised land, but he also knew that his faith, his obedience, his prayer would plant seeds in the spirit that would bloom long after his bones had returned to dust. When Moses prays for God's work to be seen by future generations, he's laying down a foundation of hope. And he continues in verse 17, "Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us. Establish the work of our hands." Yes, establish the work of our hands. Twice he says it, because sometimes we need to hear it again. We need to believe it again. You are not forgotten. Even in the middle of your dry season, even in the middle of your silent nights, God is establishing something. And not just for you, for your children, your household, your legacy. That's the mystery of Moses' prayer. It reaches beyond time. It speaks to every believer who has ever felt stuck in a spiritual desert. It reminds us that favor doesn't always look like instant success. Sometimes it looks like endurance, like unshakable hope, like showing up day after day, believing that God's power will be revealed in his perfect time. This psalm, the oldest in the Bible, ends not with despair, but with destiny, and that destiny includes you. So now, let's do what Moses would have wanted. Let's seal this moment with the same reverence he had, by praying the prayer that Jesus himself taught us, the one that has passed from generation to generation, carrying the voice of heaven. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory forever. Amen.